Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Just a Few. Here on this platform, I take the opportunity to provide biblical responses to questions from people just like you. Of course, my name is Patrick Antoine. Glad that you are joining me for this episode. I'd love to hear from those of you on the other side of the camera. Just a comment, just a word of encouragement. It lets me know whether I'm reaching people or not, if it's an effective platform for speaking to people or not. I can only know based on your response. So utilize the comments in the whatever social media platform and just say hi, or maybe you have a comment to make in other forms. I look forward to that. If you have a question and you'd like for me to attempt an answer to that question, please feel free to submit it to me, preferably via email. I'll leave the email address up on the screen. And as soon as possible, I'll try to provide a response to your question. Today's question has to do with covenant. And covenant is not something that we are really familiar with in this part of the world and in these times. Marriage, of course, is a covenant, and many of us don't understand what a marriage covenant really means. But we have words like contract, or on a national level, we have words like a treaty. So we're going to look at something to do with covenant. So let's look at the question. The question is, what was the Abrahamic covenant and why is it important? So let's look at the first part of the question. I already touched on covenant in general. Let me give a bit of a definition. A covenant was a binding agreement between two parties with or who had common interests. So it's an agreement. The Abrahamic covenant is the theological way of saying the covenant God made with Abraham. You hear Davidic covenant, the covenant God made with David, Mosaic covenant. It's just a matter of who the covenant was made with, and these covenants were made between God and different individuals. So the Abrahamic covenant refers to the covenant God voluntarily entered into with a man named Abraham. Abraham lived about 4,000 years ago. He was from the part of the world which is known today as Iraq. It was called Ur of the Chaldees back then. And so he was a Chaldean, what's later known as a Babylonian. And that covenant involves several aspects of God's plan of redemption. And that's why it's so important. It's more than just something that God agreed with Abraham alone. There were other covenants before the covenant God made with Abraham. Since the days of Adam, God promised certain things there in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3:15, and each subsequent major covenant of the Bible sort of like builds on these previous major covenants. Now, getting back to the Abrahamic covenant, the original details of that covenant can be found in Genesis chapter 12, and that's where I'm going to be focusing my biblical response in Genesis 12. Beside that, however, the details were expanded, and we find more details in Genesis 15, and then it was expanded even more concerning different aspects, which we're going to look at now, of the covenant. It was expanded again in Genesis 17. Further to that, after the death of Abraham, his death did not negate the promises God made. The promises were repeated or passed on to or affirmed to Abraham's son Isaac. And we find that in Genesis 17 verse 19 and in Genesis 21 verses Genesis 17 verses 19 and 21, and then Genesis 21 verse 12. The covenant promises were passed on to and affirmed to Isaac, although Abraham had several other children with Hagar and with other wives in Genesis 25. Subsequently, the promise after Isaac died, the promises of the covenant were affirmed to Jacob, Isaac's younger son. The older twin was Esau. Covenants were usually ratified with a memorial sign, and the sign of the Abrahamic covenant was male circumcision. On the 8th day of their lives, all descendants of Abraham biologically were brought into the covenant by their parents by an act of circumcision. So now let's just bring this all together by going to the passage in Genesis 12 to see what God promised Abraham. And they realized nothing was required of Abraham or his descendants. This was almost like a unilateral covenant where God voluntarily entered into this, and he says, I will do such and such. Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3. Now the Lord had said to Abram, which is another name, or the first form of Abraham's name. Later his name was changed to Abraham. Originally he was called Abram. So now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The only thing that was required of Abram then was to obey God and leave where he was from and trust God to lead him to the place God had called him to go to. It's not that Abram had to do certain things as his part of the covenant agreement. And from this now, you'll see why it's so important to understand the significance of the Abrahamic covenant. There are 4 things that are pointed out there. 1, God promised a place. He says, to a land that I will show you in verse 1. A land, a place. We call it throughout the Bible. Old Testament is referred to by different names, but we normally refer to it as the promised land. And so that's the first thing, a place, the promised land. Second thing, a people that will come from Abraham. A nation will be built out of Abraham's loins. And he says, I will make you a great nation in verse 2. A people, first a place, then a people that will come from Abraham's loins. And then the third thing he says, I will bless you and make your name great. The 3 great monotheistic religions of the world, Judaism, Christianity, and then later on even Islam, trace their origins to Abraham. His name is great, widely known throughout the world. But God says, I will bless you. So it's a promise, because he goes on to say, you shall be a blessing, and I'm going to bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curse you. So there's not only a place and a people, but a prophetic promise, meaning a blessing for those who would bless Abraham, or a curse for those who seek Abraham and his descendants' destruction. And the 4th thing that we see there, he says, in you, at the end of verse 3, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That is the messianic promise. It's called a person. I refer to it as a person. Someone is going to come from Abraham's descendants through whom God is going to bless not just Abraham's family. It's not going to be restricted to the people who later on will call the Jews, but through them, they will be like a channel, not a receptacle, but like a channel through which God is going to fulfill the promise of Genesis 3:15, which was for all the peoples of the earth, Jews and Gentiles, to be blessed. That will take place through the Messiah. As Luke chapter 2 said, the angel says, he is the one who's going to usher in peace upon earth for all peoples who will come to God the Father through him. So that's why it's so important. The Abrahamic covenant makes reference to a place, the promised land, a people, the promised people, the covenant people of God. 3, a promise, a prophetic promise. 4, a person who will come through Abraham. And you'll see all the other covenants that come afterwards are linked to this covenant. The place, later on in Deuteronomy chapter 29, you'll see something called a Palestinian covenant that has to do with Israel occupying the land. The people, you'll see the Mosaic covenant built on God choosing them as a people out of Egypt. And then the last one, the person, you see the Davidic covenant develops the line from Abraham through which the Messiah will come. He'll come off the seed of David. And so that's why God made a covenant with David. So the other covenants build on these promises. So that's what the Abrahamic covenant is all about. It's a major covenant. It affects the way people actually interpret events related to the end of the world. If you believe that the people of God, the covenant people, was set aside, not Israel anymore, and it's now replaced by the church, it's going to affect how you view certain things in the Old Testament and in the New. So it's very important. So that's as much as I could say in these moments here. And I want to thank you for the question. My name is Patrick Antwine. I hope I shed some light on the issue for you. So until the next time, grace and peace be multiplied to you.